Okay, so we've got Henry here today, our expert in all things motion, something you studied at college, wanted to become.
Yep.
Been with us a few years now working on that. So yeah, I thought it'd be important to kind of talk through where that plays out in the modern world of branding.
Yep.
Have your view on that. Obviously you're kind of wedded to it, very passionate about it. And yeah, I thought it'd be nice to hear your take on how you see it currently playing out. You know, there are trends and there are movements and stuff like that, but you know, you're very close to it. How do you see it playing out? Anything that you've seen in particular?
Yes, I've definitely seen a lot more brands embracing motion within their stuff, which is good to see. Seen a lot more motion guidelines being talked about, more people wanting to explore that side of it, which is great. Obviously expanding on more than just what brand identity and how motion can sort of add more personality and just create more of a distinctive brand, basically. So yeah, it's been good to see.
So quite often I'm having conversations with people to get them to understand the importance of it.
Yeah.
I think it's something that seems to have maybe slowly just drifted into people's content. We can make stuff move, so let's just make it move. But there's very little thought into, well, how does your brand actually move? So quite often I've been saying to people, we're all familiar with the kind of the core components of a brand identity. Like we pick our colour palette, we pick our typography, we have a tone of voice.
Yep.
And they've been locked in for years. But it doesn't seem as if loads and loads of companies have quite grasped the idea that the way that you move as a brand should be defined at the start and is as important as colour or type. Is there any good examples you're seeing at the moment where you think, yeah, they're buying into it, like you've said, but they've also expressed it in a really good way?
Yes, you've seen on a much larger scale at Amazon, they've sort of had to tidy everything up across all their brands and kind of bring things together. So it's good to see how they sort of refined that, but also had their own motion thing. So all that kind of feels more consistent throughout the brand. And then Chester Zoo is another example. You can see they injected a lot more colour into their brand, but you can see through their extensive case study that How and How did, they've considered touch points across all parts of the brand. So it all feels like it belongs to Chester Zoo and there isn't something that feels out of place. Everything sort of moves. It all feels like it's has the same personality.
Yeah. And that's where it's becoming more and more important, isn't it? You know, I think there's an element, some animated content on social media where it's being done to hopefully just stand out, but it's that deeper thought, isn't it, to every little interaction.
Yep.
You know, whether that is just someone talking to camera, how their name might come in and their job title, whatever it is, how does that fade onto the screen compared to a full show reel?
Yep.
But there should be some synergy between the two, so you end up saying, well, if it's that important across all of these touch points, then we need to think about how fast or slow do we move as an organisation. And I'll try and get the point across. Sometimes you'll just be saying, well, JCB for me should move very different to Google.
Yeah.
And so you need to think, well, how do we want to behave and what kind of feeling and message are we putting across to those people? But there's other brands, aren't there, that are doing quite well in that space. I think I remember Klarna possibly a bit refreshing the brand. But
yeah, there's Klarna, there's Dropbox, a few different brands have put their online to see. So it's good to see how they've sort of done it. You've also got Headspace that their sort of brand is all about keeping people relaxed. So they've kind of used it sparingly. Sometimes you can overdo it with animation where it's too overwhelming for the customer. So because what's set to their end, you can see how stripping it back actually works a lot better than just shoving too much animation and being too flashy.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and that's about the way we live our lives, really, isn't it? You know, it's about the tempo that's required for something. So a while ago, we did a webinar trying to get that point across and picked out two examples. One was Four Seasons, higher end luxury kind of hotel getaway, and another one was Butlins, and they both had a video to promote their offer, but both of them did it very differently, even though essentially you're going away somewhere for a period of time, but your choices are very different and you've got to reflect that. And the Four Seasons approached it in a way where the video was just on one person or item or quality of the product, really slowly paced, really slow music. And Butlins was lots of people, family friendly, people coming down slides, the music was really upbeat and fast, and the graphics represent that, but both of them give off a completely different feeling. So if Headspace was to go quite frantic just because you can animate, they'd get it massively wrong, wouldn't they?
Definitely. Yeah, there's definitely a time and a place, and like you said, it does work better for some brands. It all depends on the brand itself.
And I think people sometimes can get carried away, can't they? You know, we can be asked or briefed to achieve X, Y, and Z because someone's seen something somewhere else.
Yep.
but it doesn't mean it's appropriate for their brand.
Exactly. And I guess that's why it's good to do motion guidelines and have them there. So it's something you can reference back to, because even with brand guidelines, it can get easily lost if it's not followed and things like that. So having motion guidelines in that sense kind of helps you stay on track for what the brand should be.
Yeah, and often I think people will brief in a video or an animation to someone.
Yeah.
But because there is no rules, anything can be produced from it.
Yeah.
Whereas what we're trying to say is that if you can have motion guidelines at the start, like you would defining your colour or your type, then you've got a consistency in the way that you want to approach it. So then if you do do a series of videos and then you don't do anything else for another 6 months, you can still come back to a set of guidelines so that you stay on track. You know, we all know managing a brand, keeping it consistent is tough.
Yeah.
And obviously when it gets the extra layer of movement involved in it as well, you can imagine how quickly it could go off track if you've not got some guidelines in place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then you could also get brands that would reach out and they would want 3D work instead of 2D work, and we have to decide whether that is actually appropriate for their brand. And we might decide that actually, because of your brand guidelines, and if they want to explore motion, it might be better that they lean more towards 2D, or the other way around. It just depends.
Yeah, and those decisions, again, are brand-based decisions, aren't they? Sometimes we'll inherit a brand. It may have 2D illustration, and that might actually be appropriate for the brand. So it's more likely that anything that you're going to do from an animation perspective is going to stay in the 2D zone, isn't it? 3D can have its part, but for the appropriate brand. And there are cases where you can blend to a degree, isn't there? You know, even for ourselves, we will have elements where we might bring a device to life and have it rotate to kind of express the digital world, which makes it partly 3D, but at the same time, a lot of our graphical stuff and our typography is 2D systems, isn't it?
Yeah. And I've also seen a trend at the minute where a lot more agencies are doing 3D stuff in the case studies, highlighting that side of it.
Yeah. So it's an ever-moving landscape, ultimately. Also, I've noticed over time, in conjunction with animation and motion, maybe the palettes of people's colours as well have started to brighten slightly. Is that something that you've recognised as well when refreshes are happening? Like maybe the colour palette's becoming more vibrant than it would have been in the past?
Yeah, I guess you could say part of that is because we're in more of a digital space, so a lot more brands, because they sit in that space less than the print side, they want to inject more colour into it, and it is more appropriate, and it feels more lively and interesting, and it looks more good to look at.
Yeah, and I think there's been a shift for a long time, you know, having moving graphics, and the reason they can move is because generally you're looking through a screen. Yeah, you can't do that in printed form. So it makes sense that people's colour palettes are being aligned to that. You know, you're looking on digital devices, it's an RGB colour palette, not a CMYK colour palette. It's backlit quite often as well. So naturally your colours are going to be a little bit brighter. But I think it's a change in landscape over many years as well. You know, think about like the finance sector. Back in the day, the bank would have probably picked navy blue and burgundy and emerald green and those types of colours to give a sense of like, oh, we're secure and your money's safe with us, you know, and concrete pillared buildings and stuff like that. You think of the modern landscape and financial space, you know, the likes of Revolut or Monzo and things like that.
And Wise as well. I think they've done something recently.
Yeah, it's radically changed the overall feel, isn't it? Because you'd like to think your money's still safe, but it's very digitalized, which means that you're interacting with those brands through apps and websites more than ever before. So hence, like, you know, Barclays, NatWest, some of the more traditional ones over time have changed their colour palette, but they've also started to focus in on what's the experience like to move through a process, whether that's transferring money from one account to another, or Monzo's app is quite intuitive, and how you can share money with each other and take your card on holiday and put funds into it. It's how you interact with those displays become important as well, don't they?
Yeah, definitely.
And I guess on top of that, I mean, we're talking about motion today and how things move, but there's obviously a synergy to sound as well. How do you normally approach that, you know, with music or actual sounds being accompanied to animation? What's your kind of approach to trying to get that to the best standard you can? I'm thinking about, and you may refer back to this, but there's a chance, and I know we have to do it sometimes, but you buy stock music. And so the stock music, then what does that do? Does that determine how you lay your graphics out? Because you're trying to make it match the beats as best you can. Other way around is you could produce motion and then have a track built over the top of it, potentially. Because you can tell someone to create a bespoke track to match your graphics. I often will talk about just the expectation in life, like real world. If I shut a door behind me as I walk through it, I'm expecting to hear a thud. And if I don't, I'll probably look back thinking, did the door shut properly? And if I drop a glass, there's going to be a noise when it hits the surface.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't, I'll feel weird. So that's why I'm opening up that conversation, is the synergy between music and sound, that the type should hit and a noise should happen, or the beat of the music should happen.
Yeah.
So
should I mention Dorco, like, for example, or something like that?
You can mention a company, or just say one of our clients, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But just trying to educate people a little bit about, you can't just go and buy a track and then slap animation over it because it fights.
Yeah.
It's like, in an ideal world, you want to get the synergy of all the things together.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just start that question again. So with motion being the topic of what we're going through today, there's also a real synergy to sound. Where appropriate, whether that's music laid over the top of something, whether it's a sound portfolio potentially. What's your approach and method, or the best possible outcome you can have when you're trying to work with sound and movement at the same time?
Yeah, I guess for me it's about working with the client and working with a composer, for example. It's not something where you can just slap a track over a motion piece and hope that it aligns, because it's not always going to happen. So for me, like, one of our clients came to us and they wanted a Sonic logo. So what we did, we worked with them and kind of like storyboarded like a rough idea, then worked with a composer to then sort of match with our concept. We didn't go to the composer with a finished logo animation. It was kind of a collaborative process where we worked together, and then once the sound was fine-tuned, we used that storyboard and sort of brought it together, and if there was anything that wasn't matching up, we'd go back to the composer and then make some sort of like fine-tune. So I guess for me, it's all about, it's definitely a collaborative process. It's not something where it can be all on one person and then just passed over and feel very disjointed. So
it's linear to a degree, isn't it? Because obviously there's a method and a process, but at the same time there's a bit of back and forth.
Exactly,
and a few tweaks to try and get the best possible product out there. I think in the real world, we as humans are wandering around doing things day to day, and there's always an association between the two. If something moves or drops or something like that, you expect a sound to match that. So if I was to drop a glass, there'd be silence until it hits the floor, and then you should hear the smashing noise. So that's our expectation. If I walk through a door and then I slam it behind me, as I walk off, I'm expecting a thud, and if I don't, I'll probably look over my shoulder and think, why didn't it? Oh, it's not actually shut for some reason. And I think sometimes people forget that when they actually come to do motion-based graphics and sound. That's the world that we live in. That happens daily. If you walk, you hear your own footsteps at the time where your foot hits the ground. There's a direct link between the two, which is massively important, isn't it? When that happens, and I'd say Apple generally good at that when they do the TV ads, it's making those two things kind of just work in harmony and kind of hit at the right time. How much of a difference do you think it makes when someone's not really paid attention to that compared to when they've properly crafted it?
Yeah, I think it makes a big difference. For example, like we've worked with one of our clients. We've worked on a TV ad for them where the script's been very like fast paced, and it's been very like upbeat, and then they've sent some examples of potential soundtracks that they want, and they're a lot more slow, and that's just not going to work in comparison. On the other end of the spectrum, when we've worked with more of a high-end company where they've needed more of a slow track, we need to make sure that it's slow enough so it feels more appropriate for them. And then, like I said, on the other side, where it needs to be a bit more upbeat. So yeah, it definitely is really important. And I guess it's kind of up to us to kind of like help the client and work with them to understand what is suitable for their brand.
Yeah. And then another element is obviously type and typography. And, if you're in a certain space, you're on a web page and you're reading something, or you're reading a blog, or even reading a printed book and stuff like that, there's a time and a place where you quite happily sit and read words. Motion graphics and 15-second bits of content, or 30-second bits of content, or a TV advert, whatever it might be, you need to get the message across quickly. You can't have War and Peace written on a page, because if you did, which hopefully you'd never do, but if you did, the whole thing's then static again, because it has to stay still long enough to be read, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So when you're working on type, not only trying to make it short and concise and working with a copywriter to make sure that the message and the story's clear, but when you're reading the words yourself, how do you go about thinking, well, actually that word has a bit more of an expression, and so I can bring a bit of life to it, but at the same time you're trying to consider the brand that you're delivering it for, so how much expression it can have and stuff like that. How much do you kind of base the words around what they can and can't do based on their meaning?
I guess I would kind of treat it as more of like primary and secondary. So say if we've got type on screen and there's quite a lot of type, we want to kind of, for headlines, we kind of want that to be a bit more visually impacting. So we might do something a bit more fun with the animation, where if you've got like secondary type or like on-screen T's and C's or anything where it's like a little bit more long form, form, you're not going to want to have that. You're not going to want to have that same treatment. You're going to want to have that a lot more simplified, so it's easier for the viewer to kind of digest it all together.
Yeah. Okay. And what do you think the future holds for motion design? You know, we've got things like AI creeping in and people thinking anything can be done anywhere. You've mentioned some big brands today that put in their best foot forward, you know, from Amazon, Klarna. Do you think it's something all companies should be trying to embrace the best they can? I think the times have gone where, you know, any brand that could have moved had to have a TV advert years ago.
Yeah.
But now we live in a world where every brand should, in theory, have at least a social channel and have a website and maybe do some video to camera type work. So there's an opportunity for every brand to move. What would you like to see the future kind of play out? Does more people embrace it, or the standards be withheld?
For me, essentially, I guess, I think it'd be good to see more brands embrace motion through all touch points. I mean, I think we live in a world where we should be doing more than just a logo animation. We should be considering all touch points of a brand and where motion can be used and where it should and shouldn't be, because it's good to have it, but it doesn't need to be in every place, or we could strip it back and it could be a bit more subtle in areas. But I think for me, it's important for that side of it. And obviously we've seen a lot more AI being used, but it's good to see how we can work with that. And we don't want to end up where brands are all looking the same if they're just relying on AI. So it's good to...
Yeah, I think that's probably our biggest, not a danger or a risk, is it? You know, we will adapt AI as and where we need to, whether that's in processes and systems, stuff like that, and create some efficiency. But it's just not being over-reliant on it to produce the answer for you.
Exactly.
Because you need to know what your input is. And I think that goes back another layer then to say you need to know what your brand stands for. And so then you need to determine how you're going to move as a brand.
Yeah.
And to know that at the start, or even consider it in the next couple of weeks, next couple of months, is an important path to creating a successful motion identity, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
And then you can be true to yourself, keep consistency. And for companies and marketing teams, like guidelines that have always been there, the whole point really, one is for consistency, but it's about efficiency and speed, and ultimately then a cost saving, because if you know how you're going to execute stuff, then your next video or your next animation that comes along, you can think more conceptually about it, but you don't need to get into the weeds of how do we move? Should it be fast or slow? You should have already ironed those out in the first place. So I guess the final message really is that motion graphics is going nowhere. It's only going to get bigger, and with being more of it, you need to be even more distinctive and stand out, but you need to put it into your guidelines to try and make sure that there is that efficiency and consistency, and don't get carried away with something you've seen somewhere else, because ultimately you've got to take a step back and say, is that appropriate for our brand?
Because then you could end up with just doing something flashy for show and it doesn't have any sort of meaning, and it doesn't like relate to your brand itself, just because you want something that you, like you said, you've seen something.
No, exactly. Well, that's it. It all comes down to brand. Whatever we're talking about in these sessions, it'll always come down to brand. Today was mainly about motion, but just expressing the importance of making the right decisions as early as you can, and then create that consistency and efficiency. Okay, well, thanks for your time, Henry. Get back to it now.